What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and I'm very happy in today's video to be finally talking about the newest Jurassic World animated series known simply as Jurassic World Chaos Theory, once again coming from Universal Pictures and Dreamworks, and starring people like Paul-Mikél Williams, Giambrone, Raini Rodriguez, Qasar Mohammed, Kirsten Kelly, Darren Barnett, and more. If you've been following this channel for at least a good couple of years, you know that I actually covered each of the individual seasons of Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, an animated show that takes place during the events of the Jurassic World films, focusing on a young group of teenagers and preteens that are part of this preview program for something called Camp Cretaceous, where it was kind of like a summer camp but at Jurassic World. That first season takes place during the events of Jurassic World though, so with everything that's going on with Chris Pratt's movie with Indominus Rex breaking out and all the dinosaurs running loose, on the other side of the island you follow these kids who are just having to deal with this entire Jurassic World system going down and them pretty much being forgotten about since they were a small section of this entire park. And so over the course of the multiple seasons that show ran on Netflix, you follow these characters that are all working together, building bonds, building relationships, using their own skills to survive, and ultimately named the Nublar 6 as they finally are rescued in the finale of the final season of the show. And the show was so much fun. I reviewed all of the seasons and you guys can go back and check out my thoughts, but you can watch with each and every review I did on Camp Cretaceous that I love the show more and more and more each season. And while the show is very much clearly for a younger audience, as somebody who has talked on the channel many a times with Jurassic Park and Jurassic World just being one of my favorite franchises of all time, when I was a kid Jurassic Park was one of my favorite movies of all time, and I wanted to be a paleontologist for the longest time. So it was nice to be able to watch a new animated show that, almost similar to what the Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels has done for Star Wars, you have this animated show that feels like a companion piece to the movies. And again, while definitely more for a younger audience and a little bit goofy and silly at times in a kiddie way, I ultimately found myself really invested in the story. I loved all the connections that they made to the movies and the way they were able to kind of weave various storylines from the movies into the show, and even include various characters from the movies played by the actors from the movies in the show. I had so much fun watching Camp Cretaceous. You guys can go back and check out my reviews, and I thought that was going to be it. You know, I figured it was a good 5-season run. We had a good time with it. There wasn't going to be much more to it, but ultimately then I ended up seeing a trailer for a new Jurassic World animated show coming to Netflix, only with it to end with an older version of the main character Darius at the very end of the trailer, which just completely excited me. So here we are finally talking about Chaos Theory, which is a follow-up to Camp Cretaceous and takes all of these characters that were preteen, you know, kind of like early teen years in Camp Cretaceous, and they're all now at college age. A lot of them have already gone to college. They're in their late teens, early 20s, and we get to see these characters in a completely different place. And the show starts off immediately with finding out that one of them, Brooklyn, played by Jenna Ortega in the original show Camp Cretaceous, has been killed by a dinosaur. And we find out immediately that this has caused a divide across all of our characters. They're older now. A lot of their relationships have changed. Some of them are closer than they were before. Some of them not so much. Some of them have a little bit of animosity for one another. Some of them have just kind of grown apart, but they're kind of brought together all again when they find out that Brooklyn's death may have not been an accident, and instead they're actually being targeted by some individuals who are training raptors and various other dinosaurs and want to take them out because of the fact that they survived on Isla Nublar and know more than they want them to know and have out into the real world. And so now they must work together to find out who it is that's in the shadows that is hunting them and sending these various dinosaurs after them. And man, I just thought this was such a good time, man. I watched all 10 episodes of this new season yesterday. I actually had forgotten that it was coming out this weekend. I would have done this sooner, but I was at Disney on Friday and saw like a post for it online and thought, oh my god, the show did come out. So I need to get to it as soon as I can. So yesterday, my fiance and I, who had, we both watched all of Camp Cretaceous together, we sat and we watched. We were only going to watch a few episodes to just get started, but we just kept watching, and it turned into one of those days where we sat here and watched all 10 episodes back to back and had a blast with with it. So I'm super happy to be talking about it finally. One thing to mention immediately that is both awesome and a sad part is that majority of the cast does return to play older versions of these characters, which I really enjoyed. I love that they were able to continue on this story, expand upon these characters and their storylines, and age them up, which allows us to learn about things that have happened in between the two shows, as well as kind of seeing where they are now. But one thing that is unfortunate is that a couple of cast members did not return to play their roles in this one, most notably Jenna Ortega as the character of Brooklyn, who is the one who was killed off camera, who killed in between the two shows and is kind of bringing our two characters together. Jenna Ortega played Brooklyn in the last show, and while we don't necessarily have Brooklyn as one of the main characters in this show, we do get to see Brooklyn via flashbacks that take place in between the events of Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory, with this time around Brooklyn being played by Kirsten Kelly taking over the role. I understand probably Jenna Ortega was, a lot more busy these days. She's a much bigger actress, so that's probably why she chose not to come back to this. But as a big fan of Camp Cretaceous and the fact that she was in all of those episodes, it is unfortunate that she didn't return for this show. But I will give Kirsten Kelly her flowers. I think she did an incredible job of taking what Jenna Ortega did and aging up the character and still making it sound consistent with the character that we followed in Camp Cretaceous. You also have Ryan Potter, unfortunately not returning to play the character of Kenji, but similar to the actress who took over Brooklyn, I gotta give my flowers to Darren Barnett, who did a great job of taking what Kenji sounded like in Camp Cretaceous, aging up the character, and allowing me to not even recognize that the actor had changed between the two shows. I figured it was worth mentioning that those two stars did not return. It was unfortunate, but I do think they did a really good job in casting the new actors to sound very similar to the versions that we were familiar with before. Outside of that, the rest of the cast does return, and it was just great to hear and see older versions of these characters. And something that's also a big plus on this is the animation has gotten better, and something that kind of surprised me was the mature storytelling here. Again, they're no longer preteens, they're no longer like 13, 14 years old anymore. We're at a place now where all of these characters are in their late, teens, 18, 19, early 20s, and they've all gone through a lot of things. There's a huge gap between the events of Camp Cretaceous and this. They've all gone on to have various careers or PTSD from the events of Camp Cretaceous. They've also had some of their relationships kind of fall apart. Some of them have become closer. Some of them fell in love who weren't in love before. And it's created a very interesting human dynamic here amidst this whole thing, while you also have a conspiracy of these trained dinosaurs being sent after the Nublar 6. I think that while you have this conspiracy element of it and you have all this dark stuff going on in the shadows, you also have a very human story with these characters. And I think they did a good job of allowing us to see these characters in a new place while also having a lot of story that took place in between the events of the two shows, allowing us to use flashbacks to learn more about where our characters are and how their relationships slowly changed over the course of time. I found all of that to be incredibly interesting, and I really found myself gripped to the show. And as I was watching it, I kept thinking to myself, wow, this show is getting real. It's actually surprisingly dark for what it is. The tone is substantially more mature, and the rating of the show is still similar to the first one, where I think it says it's for like ages 7, and up. And I was actually surprised by that, because while the shows have never been necessarily overly gory, there's a lot that's implied, especially in this show, when it comes to, surprising character deaths and some really dark moments and some intense moments that I could see it creeping out young fans, but also something that I think could really appease older Jurassic Park fans. I think if you're like me, it's undeniable that watching Camp Cretaceous and even this, there are some goofy elements that are clearly made for a younger audience that went in mind with this show, that you kind of have to look past it to some degree, because there is a really good story between the two. Because there really is a good story between the two shows, but ultimately it's undeniable that there is a kiddie silly element to it throughout the course of the runtime. But I think this show balanced it incredibly well, that if you were a longtime Jurassic Park fan and you watched that show, the first one, Camp Cretaceous, this show, while still has its moments that are goofy, ultimately feels substantially darker, substantially more mature, and puts our characters in a higher sense of stakes. And I found that the performances felt far more mature, the characters felt far more mature, the writing felt far more mature. It was a lot darker in scenes and alluded to a lot more gruesome things. It had its elements that also felt kind of creepy, with a new villain that's introduced here. It's probably the creepiest human villain that we've ever had in a Jurassic Park project of any kind. And ultimately, I just was really impressed by how much they made things feel grown up. I think of myself as a longtime Jurassic Park fan, as I mentioned before. If I was a kid when Camp Cretaceous came out, it would have been amazing to have been growing up, watch 5 seasons of that show, and then ultimately get this new show called Chaos Theory as I was just a little bit older, and have a story that feels still goofy, still for youngsters, but ultimately still has a lot more maturity behind it. And I think they really nailed it. I found myself ingrained in every episode. I found myself invested in what was going on. The episodes also don't really waste a lot of time. There are a couple of times where I kept thinking, all right, well, maybe this is a detour narratively, but ultimately anytime it felt like they were detouring or maybe taking away from the main plot, it ultimately tied into the main plot. And I think that the show did a great job of utilizing its time well. Each episode is about 20 minutes or so. The episodes breezed by. Watching all 10 episodes was no problem, and I never felt that sense of it dragging. I never felt like there was an episode that felt like filler or anything like that. Ultimately, I was impressed by the animation, I was impressed by the voice acting, I was impressed by the overall storytelling, and again, the maturity and the darker tone of the show. I know I've said that several times now, but it really did surprise me. And I think if you're a longtime Jurassic Park fan and you've considered giving Camp Cretaceous a watch, Chaos Theory for me really solidifies that you should. I think that, again, there is a part, if you're an adult, of watching Camp Cretaceous and recognizing, okay, there is a portion of the show that is for kids. There is an element of this show that's going to be a little sillier and goofier, and you kind of have to look past that a little bit. But some of those elements do kind of grow on you over time. That's at least my personal view on it. I was able to look past a lot of the sillier elements as time went on because I found myself falling more in love with the characters. And as they continue on the show, the character development across Camp Cretaceous I found to be incredibly impressive. Ultimately, for us to end in a way where I thought, wow, I love this show way more than I thought I would. And now here we are with Chaos Theory, where these characters are much older, and I'm far more invested than I was before. And I'm in love with the fact that the writing has only aged up with the characters, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it's trying to revert back to the same tone of Camp Cretaceous. You know, I love that idea. It feels similar almost to kind of like the Harry Potter movies, where you have the earlier movies that feel a lot more whimsical and silly because you're following kids, only for it to become a lot darker in storytelling as you get older with these characters, because they're maturing and the story around them is also maturing, and ultimately all of that really worked for me. So that's going to be my thoughts on Chaos Theory. I found it to be a lot of fun. There was a lot of twists and turns in the story. Again, the mature tone was cool, the animation was awesome, and it was just awesome to continue on the story of Camp Cretaceous. You know, I really thought it was over. I had no idea they were planning to do this show, and when I saw the trailer for it a few months back, I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled, and I hope we get more seasons of this. They left it wide open for a second season, and I'm excited to see where the rest of the storyline goes. And honestly, I'm kind of in love with the idea of franchises like Star Wars or Jurassic Park having these animated spin-off shows that are able to be integral new parts of the story of Jurassic Park. And I think if you're a Jurassic Park fan who feels like you just haven't had a story that you can connect to super deeply since the original films, and maybe Jurassic World didn't do it for you, I would honestly say, in my genuine opinion, that while I loved the first Jurassic World, I think it goes without saying that the second and third kind of lost their way narratively for me. And I have talked about those here on the channel, even though I think they both have some great action and great character moments. I think Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory now, for me, have been a substantially better and more impactful story for the modern day of Jurassic Park, Jurassic World storytelling. Again, a little silly, a little goofy, very much for kids in a lot of ways, but they also don't necessarily shy away from telling good stories, and it's clear that the creators are in love with Jurassic Park. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the two of the big producers that are a part of both shows, which is Steven Spielberg and Colin Trevorrow. Of course, Steven Spielberg having created this franchise, and Colin Trevorrow, of course, having directed the first of the Jurassic World films. And yeah, just overall, I really thoroughly enjoyed this show. I love all the attention to detail and expanding the universe of the Jurassic Park franchise, and I look forward to season 2. So I'm gonna stop rambling now. A big thanks to you guys for watching. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye bye.